Post-Apocalyptic Skyrim. What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to FudgeMuppet. My name is Scott, and today I will be taking you through an interesting thought we had about the current state of Skyrim, and for that matter, all of Tamriel. Upon researching lots of first-era lore, we were marveling at some of the crazy borderline sci-fi stuff that was happening back then. But then, we looked further into the timeline, and it only seemed to go backwards. The current state of Skyrim shares many of the same traits of a post-apocalyptic world and also has some pretty cataclysmic stuff happen in the last 200 years. So that is what this video is all about, pointing out the similarities and showing how Skyrim is kind of post-apocalyptic. And in classic FudgeMuppet fashion, I think it's important to put out some ground rules and definitions for the basis of the video, before we start. Obviously, I am not saying this is literally Mad Max or Fallout. Of course, there are civilizations and empires, but if you looked at other post-apocalyptic fiction, you would see very similar worlds where humanity has strived to rebuild again, building cities with materials other than corrugated steel and cultures with other purposes than cannibalism and raiding. I mean, even if you look at Fallout New Vegas, there is Caesar's Legion, which is a civilization, and the NCR, which is practically a democratic republic in itself, so civilization definitely is rebuilding in the Fallout franchise. If there were a collapse of civilization over a long period of time due to many cataclysmic events spread out, lessening both the technology and culture of a peoples, this very well could be considered post-apocalyptic. Imagine if humanity on Earth got in war after war and plague and famine swept over the Earth, each generation was educated less than the last, technology being lost to generations, until we end up in some sort of feudal medieval-like society, maybe with a few relics of old technology that the scientists try to understand. This would be considered post-apocalyptic, aka after an apocalypse, an event causing destruction and devastation on a catastrophic scale. But wait, doesn't that sound familiar? No, not Fallout, but Skyrim. Countless quests of exploring ancient ruins, far more advanced than anything possible today, filled with what are essentially robots, magic that is so far beyond modern understanding but was utilized commonly by the ancient civilizations. You get where this is going, so sit back and relax, and let's start with some points broken down into nice chunks. Firstly, I want to talk about the idea of technological regression, basically how far technology has declined since its peak. So, we were just talking about the ancient civilizations being far more advanced, so let's break down what we see in Skyrim. Let's start with a big obvious one, that to be fair, they were the most advanced society Tamriel has ever known, but regardless, it is still valid. The Dwemer or Dwarves mastered the divine art of tonal architecture, which allowed them to manipulate reality itself. This in itself is an absolute mastery of intellect. And no, this isn't even magic in the traditional sense. It's something outside of that. It doesn't need magicka. It comes from an incredibly deep understanding of the universe. They used this to create vast underground cities that would never erode or rust due to their manipulation of reality. They created automatons, essentially robots of complex design, that are still functional thousands of years later. They created a unique alloy of Dwemer metal that has never again been able to be replicated. And on top of this, they built the Numidium and found a way to turn themselves into a god, though it did kind of backfire. However, the Tribunal comes along shortly after and makes themselves living gods with their technology. So it's pretty next level stuff, but that alone doesn't mean a technological regression. I mean, they were like an alien level, an exception. Or were they? Look at the ancient Nordic Ruins, for example, also built thousands of years ago. You may immediately think, oh, they're not that advanced because of their rustic stone look, but look deeper. The technology in them is quite remarkable and unable to be replicated today, or at least haven't been. Even just look at the vast underground networks that the ruins are. Sure, in our world you can just use machines and advanced technology to create subways and tunnels, but we are talking about a civilization of Nords who were still wielding hammers and swords. They had no cranes or drills to help them, so their construction at that time, considering the tools they had, is a marvel of ingenuity. But even look further at the complex traps and doors. You are probably accustomed to sliding doors and think they're no big deal, they're at the grocery store, but even then it's just glass and metal. The doors opened by dragon claws are made of stone, and stone is really heavy, yet somehow they had the ingenuity and ability to create a mechanism that could close and open a multi-ton stone door, which also was accessed by a security mechanism. This stuff is incredibly advanced for its time. Modern day Skyrim's architecture is fairly straightforward, mostly wooden houses and such, and at that many of the marvelous structures that exist were also built by ancient Nords like Ysgramor's Palace and Dragon's Reach. This thought about Nordic Ruins gave me a newfound respect for the ancient Nords. They were obviously far more than just invading barbarians. I also have to mention the Aelids. Though not in Skyrim, their construction of underground cities and the White Gold Tower, along with their advanced starwells, Welkin stones, Vala stones, and conception of alteration magic, were almost godlike by today's standards. Then you have the Riemann dynasty in the First Era, who essentially had a space program. The Battle Spire was an academy for training battle mages of the Imperial Legion, and it was basically a space station that acted as a gateway to various planes of Oblivion. Then there were the Manonauts, which were a special corps of essentially astronauts who flew ships into the space of the expansive void and tried to reach Aetherius itself. The Ultima also attempted this with their sunbirds, giant birds made of solid sunlight. Crazy stuff. And I think that is the icing on the cake when showing off how technologically advanced the old civilizations were. The main point of showing off the feats of these civilizations and showing just how insanely advanced they were is to highlight how dismal modern Tamriel is. In the year 201 of the Fourth Era, Skyrim and all of Tamriel's civilizations are nothing compared to their ancestors. But let's not forget what is essential to proving a post-apocalyptic world, the apocalypse or apocalypses. Well, for the Fourth Era Tamriel, there is one apocalypse that trumped them all, the Oblivion crisis at the hands of Mehrunes Dagon. This was the catalyst for all the shit that follows in the Fourth Era, but the actual devastation was immense. After its resolution, there were civil wars like the Stormcrown Interregnum, and provinces were leaving the Empire left, right, and center. Then you had Red Mountain explode, causing many Dunmer to be killed and have to flee Morrowind as refugees. Then their genocide at the hands of Argonian invasion. You then had radical elven supremacists take over the government of the Somerset Isles, and then these Thalmor help a coup against the Valenwood government. A giant floating island called Umbriel comes and does some damage, heaps more shit happens, and then we are hit with the Great War, one of the bloodiest conflicts to ever occur on Tamriel. Cicero's journal shares some valuable insight onto the onslaught that occurred as a result of this. Wayrest in High Rock fell to Corsairs. Breville erupted into violence with war raging between the biggest skooma trafficking gangs. His journal also mentions Shaden Hall erupting into violence in the 189th year of the Fourth Era, as I quote, like so many other cities before it, which indicates even 14 years after the Great War has ended, the cities of Cyrodiil are still violent and crime-ridden. Then we have the final apocalyptic event of the dragons returning and Alduin trying to eat all of existence. So we can establish the premise of apocalyptic events and post-apocalyptic effects, and the technological regression that has been happening for hundreds of years. So, what else is a very post-apocalyptic feature? Anarchy, superstition, and opportunists. I mean, we just talked about the anarchy and violence of the Cyrodiilic cities, as well as the opportunistic gangs and the Corsairs that sacked Wayrest. But let's keep the focus nice and tight in Skyrim. Your immediate assumption for Skyrim is, oh yeah, we have cities and stuff, we got civilization, which is true, but have you considered how dangerous Skyrim really is? Markarth and the lands of the Reach have many problems with the Forsworn natives attacking them constantly. Then you have bandits everywhere, and I mean everywhere. Skyrim is coated with them. Independent gangs of raiders who are anarchist opportunists who prey on the weak and steal their resources. Take Whiterun, for example. How much do they really control? They have their entire hold that belongs to them, but most of this land is dominated by bandits, necromancers, and outlaws. Really, there is the Whiterun city and Rorikstead as well as Riverwood, which both of those are poorly protected. And consider that there are a bunch of Forsworn with a whole fort and many men who could just come down the hill, sack Rorikstead, and leave with all their goods. Between Whiterun and Rorikstead alone, you will come across many caves, forts, and ruins which are dominated by bandits. In Skyrim, there are more bandits than there are civilians of towns and cities. It sounds a lot like Fallout to me, with raiders everywhere and vicious opportunists who prey on the weak. Then throw in a vampire invasion that would claim the lives of many, and on top of that, for the civilization that is functioning, there is a civil war causing even more violence and anarchy ravaging the land. So in a lot of ways, Skyrim is just as fucked as the world of Fallout, but without the gritty trash can radioactive aesthetic that Fallout has. Another point, consider that magic is essentially science in the Elder Scrolls universe. Mages and wizards are essentially your scientists. Most new inventions are made with magic, and the aforementioned feats of previous civilizations were usually done with magic. So, with this analogue, removing magic or hating magic would be the equivalent of shunning and ignoring math and science. Guess who hates magic? The Nords of Skyrim. The Nords have severe superstition of magic, which mind you is not unfounded, considering the recent events of the Oblivion crisis and the onslaught of the Aldmeri Dominion, many of whom use magic. But it was not always this way. The Nords once respected the clever man, the ancient Nordic phrase for what essentially was a mage or wizard. But over time they grew to distrust magic as they were exposed to its potential catastrophic results. However, that does just feed into the technological regression and post-apocalyptic vibe. Nords no longer utilize the very thing that grants technological innovation because of fear and superstition. Now, continuing with this analogy, where does this sound familiar in a post-apocalyptic setting? It couldn't be a group of power armor-clad individuals who hoard technology, refusing to let society advance out of fear that they would misuse said technology, fearing the same catastrophic events of the past. Yes, the Brotherhood of Steel in the Fallout franchise. The similarities are glaring. So in summary, we have the technological regression for hundreds of years, apocalyptic events like the Oblivion crisis and the Great War, you have violence and anarchy erupting all over, you have more bandits and outlaws than you do have civilians in the cities, vampire invasions and a civil war tearing a province apart, then as the icing on the cake, the main way of advancing civilization, magic, aka technology, is feared and shunned by the people, therefore it never gets to flourish the same, therefore never will you again see the same feats of technology. So you're left with a pretty grim post-apocalyptic setting. I hope you enjoyed that video, guys. It was just a little bit of fun pointing out some of the very interesting comparisons to the post-apocalyptic genre. Let me know what you think. Are there any more comparisons you can think of? Regardless, my name is Scott from FudgeMuppet. Social media links are in the description, as well as a link to our Twitch channel, which, by the way, we recently did our first ever official stream, and it was so much fun. An official schedule will be released soon here on YouTube, but until then, listen out on Twitter for notification of when the streams start. Thanks again so much for watching, guys. Your support means the world to us, and I'll be back again to nerd out with you again next time.